Everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to file in and we'll get started soon.
Sometimes there's no one else who loves me like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I know all the feelings that we shared are in the past. And I know your relationships are never meant to last. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. We're moving on. We're moving on. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on.
Everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch. We'll give everyone another minute or two to file in and we'll get started shortly.
Sometimes there's no one else who loves me like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. We're moving on. We're moving on. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and cut the music. Hey everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch, number 97. We have a couple more left until we hit the big 100. If anyone has any topic suggestions for the big 100, don't forget to drop comments or leave comments on the YouTube live replay as well. But today's topic is going to be on the Cassandra Datasource for Grafana. And today's talk is going to be given by Obi, who's an engineer here at Anant. Co-organizers for this event are Rahul and myself. If you're interested in giving a talk here at Cassandra Lunch or Data Engineers Lunch, you can reach out to me. My email is listed below. If you're also interested in sponsoring, feel free to reach out to me as well. We're a part of Data Community DC. Data Community DC believes in building an inclusive environment, so no matter your race, gender, or sexual orientation, everyone is welcome, and we expect the respect to be given to all. Data Community DC is built up of a bunch of different organizations. Our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch is held under the umbrella of Data Wranglers DC. So if you're interested in all the various events put on by Data Community DC, you can check out more at datacommunitydc.org. So what do we cover here at Cassandra Lunch? We cover everything that is Cassandra, talks Cassandra, or plays well with Cassandra. So whether that be open source Cassandra, enterprise level like DataStax, Scala, Yugabyte, key spaces, even managed open source like Avon or Instacluster. So anything that is Cassandra or talks Cassandra, as well as things in the ecosystem. Like today, we'll be talking about the Cassandra data source for Grafana. We also cover topics related to Spark and Kafka, Airflow, etc. So if you're interested in learning something in the ecosystem of Cassandra and then giving a talk about it, feel free to reach out or drop a comment below. If you're new here, say hi, hello in the YouTube chat or Zoom chat. Group rules, if you have a question, please ask it, but be polite and courteous to others. The guest speaker may have preferences in terms of when they prefer questions, so be on the lookout for that. But again, this is meant to be a community, so please do share what you know with us. So the more you know, the more everyone will know. Or if you have any questions, you want to learn more, feel free to ask questions. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So Cassandra is our bread and butter. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University helps provide venue space when we have in-person events. We also have some institutional or organizational sponsors. If anyone is looking for a job or is offering any jobs, feel free to drop links in the YouTube chat or the Zoom chat, and we'll get them transferred to and from. If anyone has any meetups, hackathons, or conferences that they would like to promote as well, feel free to drop links to those as well. DataStax has a build-a-thon surrounding DataStax Astra that's currently ongoing. I think the second month has wrapped up or is getting near to wrapping up. So you can still join the third month. And if you qualify to be one of the top 3 winners at the end of the third month, you qualify for demo day. So there's cash prizes to be won for each month round, as well as cash and swag prizes to be won on the demo day if you qualified. Anant is hiring full-time or part-time positions, data platform operators, engineers, or architects. You can find out more at careers.anant.us. So some upcoming talks we have for Cassandra. We have Cassandra on K3S, which is scheduled for next week, as well as Data Engineers Lunch, which happens on Monday. We have a talk from Eric Stammer from Decodable. This is also part 2 of a series that is in conjunction with part 1 on data PM. If you missed that, check it out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. And all these videos are recorded and hosted on YouTube. So if you want to go back and watch any of the Cassandra Lunch videos, they're available if you search for Cassandra.Lunch, as well as Cassandra.Link should be your number 1 resource for all things Cassandra. All of these resources are handpicked by the team here at Anant. So if you have any questions related to Cassandra or any tools in the Cassandra ecosystem in how they relate to Cassandra, you can check out Cassandra.Link as well. And with that, we will go ahead and give it over to our speaker for today, Obi.
All right, give me a second to share my screen and we will get started. As you heard, I'm Obioma Anomnachi. I'm an engineer here at Anant. During my presentations, I generally prefer to take questions in the chat, although if we are at an in-between or a stopping point, that is a good time if you would like to just unmute and ask your question. That's a good time for that. So those times will generally be in between the slide deck as we move to the demo portion, after the demo is over, or when we're otherwise moving between topics. So the overarching topic for today's talk is the new Cassandra data source for Grafana. We have previously mentioned some connections for Cassandra and Grafana, which we'll talk a little bit about more during the presentation. But this new data source is for visualizing time series data in Grafana. So starting out, what is Grafana? It's an open source data visualization tool. It allows users to query, visualize, and then also create alerts on data from any number of sources. They have all types of plugins that you can add that allow you to connect to a number of external tools. And it's also a tool for the creation and sharing of dashboards, and a BI tool that has querying and transformation tools available within it. So not only do you have access to visuals on your data, but you can also do transformations and then view that data. Generally, the way it works is Dashboards contain panels, which allow for dozens of different types of visualizations of data, including normal scatter plots, heat maps, calendars, just a view of the table. All those things are possible within Grafana. There are also plugins to connect to a number of external services like Google Drive, Jira, even other BI tools like Snowflake. And you can get bundled apps for custom combinations of plugins and panels. So if you have an external service that also requires a specific type of visualization, for example, one of the apps you can get does synthetic monitors for your websites. So you can ping your website, see if they're up or not, and then also view that data in a specialized panel in Grafana. And you can see over on the right, the sort of way that this works. Logs, metrics, and traces all come in to Grafana through your external programs or through APIs. And then all of your various responses, you can generate reports, you can create dashboards, you can gain usage insights, and get info about governance. So the ways that Grafana and Cassandra interact. Previously, we've had a talk from a guest speaker, Sarma, on a plugin for Cassandra metrics. It connects Prometheus, Grafana, and Cassandra in a way that gives you insights about the sort of health and metrics going on within your Cassandra cluster. So it's similar to something like Ops Center or other Cassandra monitoring tools. You get an idea of the health of your cluster and other things like that, but not really a view into what your data is doing. In this case, we're going to be using the Cassandra Datasource for Grafana for visualizing time series data. So what this means is that it's not an all-purpose panel for viewing data from Cassandra. Depending on how your table's set up, you need specific matches between the way your table's set up and the way the data source works in order to be able to view your data. What this makes it is, we'll get into the details of that a little bit later, but what this makes it is especially suited to IoT cases where new time series data is constantly coming in and you want your graph, your panel to be constantly updating as well over time. So you can view the changes in that data over time. So like I said, especially IoT cases, if you have like a sensor that is feeding data into Cassandra and you want to keep track of what that value is doing over time, you can see as new data comes in, the panel will update. You can do queries on your data via the query configurator or the query editor. The configurator, it's a more automatic process. You select the specific columns necessary from your tables and it visualizes them. One of them will need to be a timestamp column, and we'll talk about the requirements for the others a little bit later during the demo. And the query editor supports your writing of custom queries as long as they align with the same sort of format. So like it says here, you have to return your columns in this specific order where it's ID, value, timestamp. So each individual entry has to have a custom ID, which means it also puts constraints on the way that your tables have to be set up. Since I don't think this supports compound, like you can't use a compound primary key as the ID. And if they overlap, you still have issues. And then value, which is the value that you're graphing. So it has to be a number, it has to be graphable. And then a timestamp column specifically. And then the way that you feed these in, they supply you these placeholders, time from and time to put into your query that determine the limits of your panel. So over time, these values change. So inputting any specific values would stick your panel in this specific range of time. So instead they give you time from and time to, so you can play around with that range in the Grafana UI and be able to view your entire your progression over time. All right, we're going to move on to the demo now. So if there are any questions about what we've already covered. Well, actually, before we move to the demo, let's look through the sheet a little bit more. So first, the query configurator and the query editor. query configurator will see this once we get into the UI as well, but you basically just set these values and then it goes and gets your data. You need a time column, you need a value column, and then you need an ID column. And then you specify the ID of the data origins you want to show. You can basically stack multiple panels on top of each other if you have a number of IDs that you're interested in. But you cannot in this singular panel tile. You can't put in more than one ID here. And then there is a config at the bottom for allow filtering. As we know in Cassandra, generally you don't want to turn this on, but sometimes if you desperately need some view that your table isn't well suited for, then this will allow you to query that data. And then with the query editor, what you do is you write out your query. It gives you a text box which you write your entire query into with the placeholders, time from, time to, and then it will give you back your graphs. All right, so we're going to look at this briefly, but basically what we have is a Docker setup with Grafana and then some Cassandra nodes and one that will feed in data. So if we look at the Docker file, we can see the details for the Grafana installation. So you start from the base Grafana image, and then all you do is you run on the Grafana CLI, install the plugin for the Cassandra Datasource. And then if we look at the Docker Compose, it's bringing up 3 containers. One is just called Cassandra. There is sample data, and then there's your Grafana. So Grafana is self-explanatory. It's the Grafana instance. It shows the UI, et cetera, et cetera. And then there is the basic Cassandra and then sample data, which as you can see, is also a Cassandra 4.0 node. So you're bringing up a 2-node Cassandra cluster, but the sample data does something special, which is that when it enters, it runs this file, sampledata.sh, which is also being passed in via volumes. And what that does, if we look at it, sampledata.sh, all it does is every so often it will run, it will put a couple of random rows into your table. So we'll actually see these dates, the data we're getting out the temperature column, and we'll see that change over time. So one of the things that we can do now is copy one of these IDs. And then we will take a minute to let everything come up properly. All right. First, are there any limitations in terms of which version of Cassandra or DSC are compliant? There's a question in the chat. So yes, there are, as well as which versions of Grafana. So for example, Grafana 5x, 6x, 7x, 4x has not been tested, and 8x isn't supported yet. And then for Cassandra, if you're using version 3.0, 3.x or 4.x in terms of open source Cassandra, 6.x in terms of DataStax Enterprise, you can also connect to Astra or AWS Keyspaces. So there are a number of versions of Cassandra that it is compatible with, but it's not necessarily all of them. If you are still way back using Cassandra 2. All right, so the demo comes with these two examples. So first, the query configurator example. If we view it here, we can see you specify your key space, your table, your time column is registered at, and it gives you a dropdown of all the columns in your data. Your value column, and your ID column, you hand it an ID value, and then allow filtering, and then it will pull any new data that comes in. So if we were to go in and put some data back here, it would show up. So this takes basically everything it can get from the table that fits this this ID, and it displays it. So as we have new data in, the time range is expanding, and then the query editor, if we were to look at that, we can see our query here. So what we're doing is select, we're casting temperature as a double, selecting all our rows. In this specific order, remember, it has to be ID, then value, then timestamp from our table. And then we give both of the sensor IDs. And then we also filter based on time from and time to based on our timestamp column. And we see we get both of our plots here on a single panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new panel, and I'm going to call it nothing, I guess.
It's on the right side in the properties panel.
Oh yeah. I'm going to call this temperature Fahrenheit. So if we look at the printout from our sample data program, you can see it's giving us temperatures between 18 and 32 for one temperature and between 12 and 40 for the other temperature. So these are obviously Celsius. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set up the graph, and then we're going to use some transformations in order to get this data back in Fahrenheit instead. So our key space is test, and our table is test. We set up our time column is registered at, our value column is temperature, and our ID column is sensor ID. We'll paste in that ID value from earlier, keep allow filtering to false. So you can see we have our data here. It's between, you know, that 18 and 30 or whatever degrees. And then we can set up transformations. I'm going to do calculation. And this actually just does a single calculation. So we're going to do binary operation, and we're going to take field times 1.8. And then we're going to add another transformation onto that. That's the same add field from calculation. Once again, it's a binary operation, and we take the intermediate temperature and we add 32. And then we only want to show this one, so we hit replace all fields, apply this, and now temperature Fahrenheit is part of our dashboard as well. So you can see it's the same in terms of shape as this graph that we're already getting from the query configurator. But the actual values are now between 60 and 90 degrees. Where's that transformation run in Cassandra? And yeah, no, this is inside Grafana's infrastructure. So it does not necessarily use Cassandra functions in order to do this operation, which means you're not limited to them, although you may be limited in other ways by what functionality Grafana has there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to see if we can get, lost these commands, gonna have to do it live. All right. Data, we want this into Zach, Cassandra. Right. Okay. So what we're doing is we're loading another table worth of data into Cassandra. This one's all generated, as you can see, but it does have a timestamp column.
The currently, I think I was a little later. I had to step out, but the data that you were generating in the shell file, is that just like, is that the shell file just like repeating a loop, or did you have something else create that data?
Yeah, no, so the shell file, I guess it's all the way up at the top now, but the shell file just creates a loop. It runs every so often, generates a couple rows of data.
Oh, okay.
So that's why new data was constantly coming in there.
Gotcha. What if you had a lot of data coming in? I know Grafana can support a lot of different resolutions, but like, how does it figure out like how many data points to show? You know what I mean? Like if you had 10,000 records per second coming in, how would it differentiate that?
Yeah, so part of that is here in the query options. You can set, how many data points the panel is going to be wide in terms of, the interval. But other than that, I think you just try and like, it's not going to sample your data for
Right.
you, I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Yeah. You still have to have a reasonable query. Otherwise, it'll take whatever it pulls and then it just shows you a filtration of it, versus like sampling it from the query side and not pulling everything. And I noticed it like creates this macroed query, like less than or greater than, right? So I think it just keeps repeating that query, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Our time column is TS. Our value column can be, which one's this one? Metric val. Then the ID column.
Excuse me, sorry.
TS having issues with that since it's a time UUID rather than a normal timestamp column. Do we get the same issue with date?
Maybe take a look at the generated query to see if, if it's actually,
This one wants to, it's because I think not set up to use a full what was I saying? Let's see.
yeah, how old is the date?
Yeah, these are quite old. So let's just pick the maximum that they have.
There we go.
Yeah, so you can see it's all between 2019 and 2022. So if I pick 1 year.
You can use your cursor to like just select part of the graph. It should filter down to exactly what you want. There we go.
Yeah. So we can see our values change over time. One of the things about this, I believe, is that we actually can end up with multiple readings per time slot.
Maybe fix the time column to TS and then change the allowed filtering to false now, because you were filtering before on time that wasn't showing any data before, right? And then set that to false. And apply it, and then just try to refresh the full time window. Okay, that way, do of whatever 5 years.
Yeah, I think this was actually an issue. Like we looked at the query inspector about it. And the issue is that column TS is a time UUID column.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so you have to make sure to use a date or timestamp column if you want to see data.
Yeah, because the the timestamp would be more granular, basically.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right, that is about all I have for today. So we got more time for questions as well as discussion now.
I just wanted to say it doesn't suck. Actually was because it was just put out there on GitHub not too long ago. And normally I'm very skeptical when I don't care who puts stuff out there when it's the first time that it goes out there. Normally it sucks and doesn't work. So
Uh-huh.
that's
I
my
had a
comment.
hunch. I had a hunch on this one actually, because it's by Hades Architect, the same guy who did the machine learning demos for Spark and Cassandra.
Yeah. I think I know. Yeah, I know you're talking. Alex is the guy who co-hosted the workshop last year, and he's solid. So yeah, definitely. Very cool. I think it would be cool to like have some stream from like Twitter, do some, let's say, sentiment analysis, positive and negative, and just stream it into here and see like volume wise what it could handle. I mean, I think it would be limited to what Twitter gives us too. And actually, since it's so, this is what I'm curious. So let's say you're looking at this view, right? And you insert data in the past. Would it automatically show up here? Like, does it keep pulling the thing, or does it only pull when the time window is moving?
Yeah, no, it keeps pulling. So I've done that one with the temperature data that we were looking at before, the like simulated IoT data. So it continues generating data in the present, but if you insert some in the past, it does show up here.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Very cool.
I think actually that depending on how you set up, there would be a difference between your query configurator and your query editor. Because the query editor, remember, look at the query here, it has time from and time to, which are probably determined by these.
Right.
So when it goes out to query your data, it only queries for whatever's in the time window, potentially, versus the query configurator, which doesn't have that functionality, and so probably just takes everything that fits the criteria from your table.
Cool.
Yeah, one question I had was you were looking for data that had overlapping timestamps. How would Grafana handle it in this case? Say if like for two timestamps you had, or for a single timestamp you had two values, does it I'm blanking on the word, but like consolidate it or pick one of the two, or does it just show it in general?
Yeah, I think what will happen is you'll get, like was showing up on here, you get like vertical lines where it has both of them on the same vertical line. It has them both on the same timestamp in the graph. So I think it will graph all your data, and then it might have trouble drawing the lines properly.
Yeah, so basically it doesn't solve like every visualization challenge. It just it's for time series data, because Grafana is there for time series.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suspect you could probably get a Cassandra source that will do a Like you could probably create one that does a generalized X versus Y plot.
Yeah, what's the name of this? Is it just specifically say time series data source connector?
No, this one is just generally Cassandra Datasource for Grafana, but it only works for time series data.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Very cool.
All right, that's all I had for it.
Looks like there's no more questions from the YouTube chat. If anyone has any remaining questions in the Zoom, feel free to speak up. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any more questions. Thank you everyone for joining us for Cassandra Lunch. We're close to the big 100. So if you're interested in hearing about a certain topic for the big 100, feel free to drop comments on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. All of these videos are live streamed directly to YouTube. So if you're not able to watch this live, you can always watch the live recording immediately after or as concurrently, and you can go back and watch it. Check out Cassandra.Link as well as Cassandra.Tools for all your Cassandra needs. And we will see you guys next week. Take care.
Hey, Obi, I thought of a question really quickly. I know that most people are logging off, and this is
Sure.
like a non-technical question, but so, let me just first say that I am a not as technical person. I'm not an engineer, just someone who's familiar slightly with Cassandra. And when in my, experience or whatever, my knowledge, I think about visualizing Cassandra data and dashboards like through Ops Center, right? And so, but I think what that is, how is this different? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I just think it would be an interesting, like, kind of non-technical question.
Yeah,
ask.
so this one, what it's doing is it's visualizing your data inside Cassandra. So the data that you put in Cassandra, it takes that out and it plots it. Whereas what you would get if you looked in Ops Center, most of the graphing and visualization functions there are towards metrics about your cluster. So, CPU user or stuff like that is about, what are the resources on your cluster doing at this time or this time or this time. And there is actually a similar solution for Grafana, which we talked about previously, but the metrics collector for Apache Cassandra can graph some of the same sort of stuff using Prometheus and visualized in Grafana.
Yeah,
Cool.
This
So-
gives you insights about your actual data, whereas these others, Ops Center and this metrics collector, give you insights about your cluster.
So one is about the health of the system, like how well it's performing, or if it, like things that might need maintenance, or if it's slowing down, or something about that. And the other is actually being able to use and transform the data that is being stored on that cluster. That's Grafana. And then Ops Center is more about like the health of the machine, like not the machine, but the health of the platform that's hosting your data. Is that kind of how you would describe it?
Obi, you can go ahead.
I would say yes, mostly. If you're looking at graphs in Ops Center, like you looked at graphs here in Grafana, anything that showed up like this is generally about the health of your cluster.
Yeah, so this is the way I would break it apart. Ops Center, the graphs in Ops Center are backed by Cassandra tables, but a different thing called DataStax agent is collecting data about all of the Cassandra nodes, and it's sending it to the Cassandra database, and Ops Center looks at that information. So Ops Center is a very specific graphing tool that only talks to Ops Center tables made by DataStax, populated by DataStax agent. So that's Ops Center. Metrics collector is basically Op Center, if it were to be done in an open source way, meaning you don't have to have data stacks. You can run Cassandra and you have something else collecting the data, like Prometheus or whatever, and it collects the data and it sends it somewhere, and then Grafana is used to visualize that information, right? So in metrics collector, the data is coming actually from Prometheus, but it's
So
still,
Prometheus is acting as the agent in that, as a DataStax agent in this situation as you're describing it.
Prometheus is more like it's a database, more.
Oh, okay.
And then they have Prometheus collectors. And so DataStax has something that'll collect data from Cassandra and send it into Prometheus, right? So that's what the metrics collector is. It's a collector that picks data from Cassandra, puts it into Prometheus. Prometheus and Grafana generally go together. Like Grafana is often used with Prometheus. They're actually part of the same organization at this point. And we've done other presentations on how like you can have a massively scaled Prometheus backed by Cassandra, but that's a different conversation. What we're looking at today is you don't have to do anything with Cassandra metrics. You don't have to do anything with Op Center. You can put any data in there as long as it's time series. Grafana is going to talk directly to Cassandra and look at that information. And so, yeah, it looks very similar, right? It's got black background and everything. But in this particular case, like you don't have to think about anything about clusters, memory, CPU. You could just be like, how happy is Raul today? You know, and just on a scale of 1 to 10 and just insert data, right? And it will graph that for you. Whereas Op Center wouldn't do that because it doesn't talk to anything else except for Op Center tables. And then metrics collector wouldn't necessarily do that because, well, first of all, it's not talking directly to Cassandra, right? It's talking to Prometheus, and there's kind of a go between. There's something that's shipping information in there. But this solution, this is my final thought on this. This solution is as close to doing a time series BI visualization with data that you have created in Cassandra.
Gotcha. Thanks. Thanks, Obi. Thanks, Rahul.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. If no one else has any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. We'll see everyone next week for Monday's Data Engineers Lunch. Again, we'll have a guest speaker from Decodable who will be talking about their solution, as well as will be part 2 of a series that's been ongoing since last week, where part 1 was about data PM. So if you're interested in the series, or if you want to check out Decodable ahead of time, feel free to check it out. The YouTube video is on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp, and we'll see you guys next week. Take care.